a little bit on some of the thoughts that I had and about how dynamic the creek is. And, you know, I'm on this micro scale. I've lived in Kentucky 36 years, and I've managed the fish hatchery down on the lower Elkhorn for 20 years and lived there, and then bought a farm, and I still live on the creek. And so I watch these changes, and we revel in, you know, a new wave or a new feature that we can play in our kayaks and have fun. How dynamic it is. Well, as Wes was saying, yeah, it's always been dynamic, you know, 60 million years didn't. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the length of the creek. That one thing in Frankfurt, everyone always says, oh, poor little old Elkhorn. It's only 99 miles, and so it's not a river. And they really say that like it hurts them in their heart that this can't be a river. Well, I took limnology and I've looked on the internet, and as far as I know, there are no rules about how long it has to be a river. And so, you know, but it's funny how many people say that. It's a common, and I think you kind of referred to it. And then also, up until, and I'm not sure I got exact dates, but when Lexington put in their sewage treatment plant, a new one, so they get their drinking water out of the Kentucky River, right? Use it, and then do a little filtering, a minor filtering, and then they put it in the Elkhorn. So it's jumping, and that's fascinating. After hearing his talk, you know, it's coming home. It's coming home as wastewater, but it's coming home. But that has really been a blessing, and you talk about the ecology and the creek status now. It's been a blessing that, because back before then, during a drought, the massive fish kills. The creek would completely go dry, no flow, and fish would die, and they'd be 5-10 years before the population built back up. So now we're guaranteed 50 CFS, 50 cubic feet per second, and you can go on the water gauge and see every night when they dump the water from the treatment plant, we get a 50 CFS bump. So, you know, it's a good or it's bad, but it's the way it is. Anyway, those were
Michael's been on the creek more than anyone I know and has more stories about it. And I'm wondering if you would be prepared to share one or two, maybe perhaps about your most memorable moments or your most challenging moments. I know when we used to get off the creek, one of our standing jokes was, well, we've cheated old death again.
Well, one thing in 2015 or something, I went and did I rode a raft down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon, and it was like, wow, I never thought I'd get to do it. But that spring, before I left, Elkhorn had been over 10,000 CFS twice before I left in April. And when we did 23 days in the canyon, it was 12,000 CFS. So, you know, and Elkhorn routinely gets, you know, over 20. So anyway, it's kind of, to put it in perspective, this famous Colorado River and little old Elkhorn hold its own, you know.
I wanted to tell a quick story about being absolutely miserable on the Elkhorn. It was a Sunday afternoon. We usually go on Sunday afternoons, and I asked a couple of people if they were going to want to go, and they said, no, better not. Looks like it's going to rain. And that never stopped me. And I finally found one friend, Tom Blue, from Georgetown, and Tom and I got on the creek. We just had a great time until we took a beer stop, which ended up into a 2-beer stop. And we noticed as we looked up in that avenue of trees on the creek that the sky was beginning to darken. Well, the next thing you know, there came this torrent of water, lightning. You know, you're not supposed to be on the creek when there's lightning, and yet we were halfway between one place and another, and we just stuck it out. Both of us resigned, half blinded by the rain, and just slogging. And we got to our put-out place at Steve Wilson's, our friend, Brother Wilson of the Church of Elkhorn, one of the founding fathers of the Church of Elkhorn, who gave us our first motto in the Church of Elkhorn, the precepts by which we live and direct our lives, when she said, standing at her stove, the wonderful cook that she is, and thinking about her childhood days in parochial school. And she was mid-sentence, and I can't really repeat this entirely in mixed company, but she was saying, oh, and I remember Sister Sarir, and she parenthetically said, oh, F the guilt. And we decided that was going to be the motto of the Church of Elkhorn. In fact, Patrick over here has the one lasting memento we've done at the creek, and we decided we wanted to, you might notice there's a Latin inscription on the front of his shirt. We decided we could never get away with F the guilt on the shirt. So I had a colleague at KSU who teaches Latin, and I said, Ed, could you give us the Latin for it? He said, well, guilt's pretty easy. Culpum, we know that word. And he said the other one's a little trickier. And he finally came up with, and I can't pronounce it, fatue. So it was fatue culpum. And I went back to Sister Christine, Steve's wife, the origin of that statement. I said, Christine, will this work? And she looked at it and she said, no. I said, what's the problem? She said, oh, F the guilt. So, but Tom Blue and I were going down the creek, and we were absolutely miserable. We were expecting at any moment to be hit by lightning, fools that we were, and Tom had gone along to, I don't know, pick up the pieces or just be the generally nice guy that he is. And we finally got to Wilson's. We didn't have a cell phone. We were absolutely miserable, both of us soaking wet, no umbrellas, these two sodden kayaks, our car somewhere to put out downstream, when we were both feeling
out of beer,
woebegone. And I looked over the hill and I saw a golf umbrella coming down in the middle of this. It was really raining, and it was my daughter. And she had thought, she knew we were going out, she was worried about us, and she came down to pull these two old guys out of the creek. You got some stories, Mike. I know you do, and they want to hear some stories.
Well, one thing I'm thinking is I like paddling the creek in the winter, and especially after your geology stuff, you know, you see so much more. You know, in the summer, it's all this vegetation, and, you know, it's beautiful, of course, but don't give up on the winter. Just be prepared. I often take a dry bag of dry clothes, and, you know, it's easy to just take some dry clothes. You don't have to have fancy paddling stuff, just plenty of beer and dry clothes, yeah. But one time, Susan and I were floating down in the canoe, and that's the other thing, in the winter, there's no people, and you tend to be a little more solitude, quiet. We're floating along, and we look up on the bank, and I mean, right next to us was a gray fox den. And what caught my eye was Mom scampered in the hole, and their three pups just sitting there, and they're clueless, they have no fear, just sitting there looking at us. And our good dogs, we said, stay, be quiet. And they just sat there, and we all got to sit and look at these guys.
I got a question. I'm going to jump in here just real quick.
Do you ever make Richard recite any poems on the river? Or you just keep that quiet?
Not even once. I've waited for my moment, not even once.
You mean when he's going?
Nobody's asked.
That's
Yeah, Richard, then the Church of the Elkhorn had the name for some of the watersheds along there.
Oh, yeah. I shouldn't say this. We created some descriptions of particular water patterns that the creek takes, and one of them, and I don't mean to offend anyone, said this is, we called it Chi Omega water. And I hope there are no Chi, oh yeah, several of you are. So what's that mean? Chi Omega water meant that it was, what was it? What was it? Not very deep. In fact, most places very shallow. But then, lest we make it a thing elevating one sex above the other, which we have learned, Michael and I both, not to do, we had one that was called, I think it was Phi Kappa Alpha water. And that one was profoundly deep, but deeply disturbed. So I said, the names of the creek are what. In fact, you taught me one name, Michael. Tell them about that.
In your book, you talk about Barking Dog Rapid, and it's so this family had their old coon dog or half coon dog or something would come and greet you and run along the rock ledge every time you came by and bark at you. And so us kayakers called it Barking Dog Rapid. And what was funny, a few years ago, one of the newer members said, I want to know all the names of the rapids and stuff. And on the internet was asking everyone to help him. And he said, I know these. And he called that one Dead Dog Rapid. And it's turned out the dog is dead. So we call it that now. Things evolve. Well, and I don't have a PowerPoint, but I did bring visual aids that are over there on the table. So that is my collection of wonderful stuff that I find in the creek. Even bigger than that green guy, I forget his name.
Shrek.
I found a panda bear a few years ago. I mean, this thing was huge, but he was so waterlogged. There's no way I'm going to take him home. I mean, probably 200 pounds or something. So I propped him up on a tree where he could dry low and people could enjoy him. And like 2 years later, he's down in Peaks Mill. Someone has propped him up against a tree, and there's my panda sitting there. I mean, it just, hey, buddy. And over there is a piece of the honeycomb, and that's a story you talk about in your book, where I watched this bee colony in a tree over the creek just above Brother Wilson's place, and it made it through the winter. And the wild colonies like that often don't. And so I kept trying to find some idiot who would climb that tree and get the honey, and it was only like that far to the water. It wasn't rocks. I mean, you'd probably be fine. And the bees would come off when you hit the water. So anyway, I'm paddling one day, and the limb's gone. It's completely gone. And almost a mile downstream, or a long ways, out in the middle of this huge, shallow riffle is this limb. And it's 8-10 inches in diameter and 50 feet long. And the butt end is this high off the water, and lo and behold, beat the honeycomb as far as I could see down in there. And I just, oh my gosh, they're not going to make it there. So I might as well get the honey, right? So my girlfriend didn't come down for a couple of weeks. I borrowed a helmet and a bee smoker and a jacket and all this, and I get buckets, and I'm all ready to get honey. We float down, and the plan is I'm going to put her on the bank to video, and I'm going to get all this honey. And when I got there was like one bee, and there was a lot of comb left, but it wasn't sweet or anything. They had gotten every drop of honey. It's just fascinating in like 2 weeks.
Somebody should mention that in rehabilitating our views of members of the opposite sex, probably the woman most honorably connected to the creek is Lucy. I learned this recently. It's not Lucy Braun. It's Lucy. It's pronounced, I think, something like Braun. And she and her sister were the first two women to acquire doctorate degrees from the University of Cincinnati. One as an entomologist, one as a botanist. Lucy was a botanist, and she did much to inventory not only Elkhorn Creek, but she did a lot of work in the eastern mountains, and she wrote a kind of groundbreaking book called The Eastern Deciduous Forest of North America, about 1950. At any rate, on these slopes of Elkhorn, very steep slopes, there is a plant called the Braun or Lucy Braun rock cress. Now, I've never seen it, and I'm fairly certain one of the reasons it's still there is it's so inaccessible. Even deer aren't able to browse on it. I wanted to say about her that she is just, she's one of my heroes. And I think of her often, especially when I had the opportunity to go to Pine Mountain for a Pine Mountain weekend and walk what was called the Lucy Braun weekend and following Lucy Braun's footsteps. And let me tell you, it was closer. It wasn't a hike to the top of this mountain. It was like what we said about walking with Claire Sipple at Lower Howard's Creek. It was the Baton Death March. And how Lucy Braun must have been an incredibly resilient woman, but she knew what was going on around that creek. That rock cress grows, I think, only in 3 places in the world, and they're all in the Kentucky River Basin. That's how rare and how localized the plant life is. And I'm sure there are other examples of that Michael knows much better than I. But
What year was she around? When was that?
what year was she? Well, what year was she?
When did she go to school, or when was she?
Oh, in the 20s.
20s.
Yeah, really remarkable woman. And I think KET has done a documentary of hers. If you get a chance to see it, it's well worth watching. I had in that series of photographs that didn't quite work today, there was a couple of wonderful photographs of her.
Say, what's the name? What was her name?
Lucy
Lucy
Braun,
Braun.
B-R-A-U-N. Remarkable woman. Yeah, please.
How often do you go swimming in the river in the summer?
We swam last night, and I thought that'll be good. We can tell folks it was my first time of the year, though. I'm pretty embarrassed.
How
Like you shampoo.
How swimmable is Elkhorn? Are there pockets that you can go down? I like Kentucky bathing. I just kind of lay back in my PFD.
Oh, I don't think you could beat Elkhorn. I mean, it's just fantastic. There's deep holes. I love to get out there when it's down to 50 CFS, when you have to walk every riffle. And if you're in a canoe, it's no, you just step out and walk 10 feet, get back in. There's no one else. You can see all the fish, and you know where the deep holes are. And you can just hang out there, and it's really nice. But I keep shampoo and ivory soap down right below my house. And I go and I get caught usually I'm coming from the garden or the farm, and don't always have my bathing suit. And I got caught once by a kayaker friend, and he was, dusk. He was fishing quietly along, and I'm down there scrubbing, and I got busted. I didn't see him coming.
Michael, say a few words about your theory about why people go to Elkhorn. Why people, both fisher folk and kayakers, why do they go to Elkhorn?
Well, one thing I think, streams are so dynamic, aren't they? I mean, compare if you put 100 people on a lake, and you put 100 people on Elkhorn, people can spread out on the creek, and they don't have to look at it, but on the lake, you're always Bob's over there, and, so I think that's, and it does change all the time. I mean, every time you go to the reservoir, it kind of looks the same. Elkhorn changes all the time.
I think about the fishermen there. Invariably, when you go down Elkhorn, you run into fishermen just standing in these beautiful pools. There might be sunlight, just beautiful, serene spots. And I often think what they're there for, and I think of a statement that is attributed to Thoreau somewhere, which I can't quote precisely, but he says that most people who go fishing aren't really sure what they're fishing for. Meaning, a lot of people, given the turmoil and the rush and the bombardment of sensations that all of us are immersed in every day, that Elkhorn is a kind of refuge. And it is so, despite the fact that you might not want to carry all the germs home when you swim, it is a cleansing experience. It's soul cleansing. And I see that all the time, and I think that's half the fun of the kayak. It's, though in some ways it is degraded, to look at it, it is incredibly beautiful, incredibly pristine. And you can imagine the state of Kentucky before we find ourselves in the state we're in.
Hey, Mike, you took us out one night with a flashlight. Tell people what you can see when you go out after dark with a flashlight.
So, my father was a aquatic biologist and worked on streams and worked on really small streams. He was a pretty famous smallmouth bass biologist in Illinois. And so as a kid, I went with him, but back then they didn't have batteries, lanterns. And my gosh, you go out there with a Coleman lantern, you couldn't hear, and the bugs, you'd just be eaten. You can imagine in the hot summertime. But yeah, you go out there and wait around at night, and your big smallmouth just sits there. There's no fear. The crayfish are out, and I remember years ago wading Benson Creek, it was really low, and the bullhead was so full of crayfish, he was on his side. He couldn't swim. You could see his stomach. Life was good, I mean, it really is, it's a different world out there. And we keep wanting to do it, but I can't stay up that late.
Anybody have any questions before Danny maybe calls us
Yeah, I'll call it
an end?
I have one more. My last question is, are you guys paddling tomorrow?
The creek is very low. It was my plan to go kayaking tomorrow, but that's somewhat in question now because it is so low.
It's a little low, but wear good shoes and don't take on too much. Don't do a 20-mile float. I mean, I don't know. We're working on that, but we need to get you and Wes into the Church of the Elkhorn. That's for sure.
We're there tomorrow if you got it.
Are you going to try to go tomorrow?
We'll try. We'll see.
I haven't paddled in 2 months with my separated collarbones. Been hard on me. But we had right about half hour before dark, a group of they were older guys. They were in their 20s and just floating along, chatting in tubes. And this is so common, They get in a tube when the creek's low, and it takes them 5 times as long as they think. So they come by my house at dark, and they got another hour.
You go to the campground? Is that where they're going to?
No, they're going to Peaks Mill.
Peaks Mill, yeah.
But they're just having a great time, and I don't even think they had a bunch of beer. And usually they're out of beer by then, and they're kind of surly. But these guys were still having a great time, and right then, when I'm announced, Bob, I got to tell you, my keys are in your car at the put-in. And that, instead of at the takeout where they're supposed to be. And that is so common. Don't take your keys on the river. Leave them under your bumper or under a rock. Don't take them on the river. But they were mad at it, and they said, oh, that's okay, we'll walk. And I swear, before I fell asleep about 10:30, I heard them walking up Peaks Mill Road, chatting across the creek from me. I swear it was them.
I want to thank Danny and everyone who worked to put this together. And if you haven't signed up on